Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Shrum, and this week we are joined by the Arts and Features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Thank you, Jennifer, and it looks like the show is yours this week.
I know. I'm so sorry, everyone. Thad is out, and so Tanya is bravely pressing on with just me. So brave. So brave.
Oh, I'm sure we can fill the air.
And we have plus it's a Thad story, which this week Thad is on the cover, or Thad's story is on the cover. And so that's right. He didn't go out and I put him on the cover. Thad's story on the cover is actually really important and wonderful. So I'm going to do my best to do it justice.
All right, Jennifer. Well, fill us in on Thad's story on this week's cover.
So the headline is Seeking Salvation, but it is not necessarily religious salvation. We are talking about resentencing in California. And you may recall we've talked a bit before about how in a 3-year resentencing program that was attached to Proposition 184, that's attached to something else. 184 is the 3 strikes rule in California, which we're going to get to. Some of you may remember when that first came across, but it caused a lot of automatic sentencing that gave some really, really harsh sentences to nonviolent crimes, among other things. So with that in mind, the resentencing program that's been, there are 9 participating counties, and the nonprofit group For the People has really been a driving force behind it. Humboldt County has been kind of the only holdout. You may recall Thad's previous story, The Outlier, about how Humboldt County has not really seen resentencing happening. So after, covering the topic a little bit, a man who is in prison reached out to Thad to share his story. And this fellow, Patrick Harvey, has been he served 25 years of a sentence that was 25 to life. And that was doled out under the 3 strikes law. And it's interesting, he is a person who has been in the system since childhood. And so at one point, I believe he said that he's spent just a short time of his life, not somehow in the system, in juvenile hall, in prison, but he went in pretty young. And his story is one of, a lot of people out there have had, difficulties in upbringing, in childhood, et cetera, and various barriers to getting the kind of help that would sort of keep you on track. But he was interested in sharing his story and sharing the story of, the things he did and the sentence he served so far, because he is one of the people that he called up Thad because he is under consideration for resentencing. So with this going on, he wanted to share his story and share, what's happening. And I'd like to come back to the complication of telling that kind of story too. But it was it's a really interesting, his is a really interesting life. Harvey began life with a really unstable, constantly moving family that was like, at one point, sort of homesteading in the woods with no skill set. And at one point became part of a religious cult that he went from being completely undisciplined, free range kid to living in an environment where every adult was allowed to discipline a kid. There are, of course, lots of really complicated family factors in here. Among them, he suffered sexual abuse, and he talks really frankly about those things, but he also talks really frankly about his ownership of his choices and his drug use. Methamphetamines was something he talks about, his cycle of doing meth and then doing crimes and sort of falling back into that, and the way that meth gave him a confidence and a positive feeling that kind of Superman feeling that he didn't get anywhere else in his life. And he talks about kind of the things he lost. And interestingly, there's also, and it is unclear, how this is going to go. At one point, his dad, who is still very religious, says, and I'm only partly ruining the story by telling you, but it's important in how it links to the title of the story. He said that it's a little bit like salvation, right? You think, what is it going to be like if he gets out of prison? And, he's like, you don't know. Right now, he's really made a lot of improvements. He's educated himself. He's improved himself in all these ways, but he's doing all that in prison. And his father was saying that it's sort of like salvation, and that you hope, that means that you're saved, but you don't really know until you're there, and he won't know. And that's kind of an interesting part of the choice. It is somewhat easy to say, easier for me to say, well, look at this. This person has been sentenced to 25 years to life, and that's the kind of sentence that they give people for murder. And this was a person who was, addicted to drugs and did a home invasion robbery, right? Or a robbery of someone's home. And there was a pattern, certainly, of law breaking that is attached to a pattern of drug abuse. And it's still hard to say how it will turn out, right? We don't know what will happen. Will he come out of prison and be a productive member of society? Will he fall back into his old patterns? It's hard to know. But right now, For the People is trying to get people like Harvey to be reconsidered by the state. And the DA, who is the person who chooses, Stacey Eads, right, our local DA, has to look at this and say, am I, doing public good here? Is this appropriate to resentence? And it's a big risk. In either direction, it's a big risk. And that was something that, we took into consideration with the story. And it's something that Thad and I talked through quite a bit. As I said, Patrick Harvey approached Thad to talk about his story, even though there is some risk in doing that, right? So in telling his story, and it's very warts and all, could it influence the district attorney's office one way or another? We don't know. Could the district attorney's office feel like, okay, this is outside pressure, which is inappropriate? We don't know. How is this possibly going to affect the outcome? It's impossible to say. And this was something that, Thad really wrestled with in terms of like, well, should we just wait to tell this story until after the decision has been made? And he really went back and forth with Patrick and was very honest with him about how this could play out, what the story would kind of share with people, that it would be warts and all. And Harvey's reaction was really that, number one, he wanted to go forward and he wanted to share the story, partly because he felt like this is the chance to be heard. And not only to be heard by, the district attorney's office and the people who are relevant to making the choice, but to be able to tell his story completely, or as completely as one can. It's a long story, but also to be able to share his story for other people, because his thought is that it's not just him, it is other people who are in his position. It is other people who are out in the world looking at people in prison and making judgments, choices, assumptions, etc. about them. And what he explained to that is that he is trying to live in amends, meaning trying to, with every day that he's got, make up for what he's already done. And his decision was really that he wanted to put this story out and to be heard, and to sort of make people who are serving long 3-strike sentences also be heard, and people who are, non-violent drug-related offenders, wanting them to be heard and wanting their humanity to be shared. So, I think different people are going to read this story and come away with a different feeling of it, right? One person might feel like, oh, he should stay in. Another person might think he should absolutely be ready to be reintegrated to society. But for him, the main thing was to be heard and to have the story out there. And as, tricky as these things can be, every time we share a story, especially one that's this personal, and this frank about, crimes, mistakes, personal flaws, we really do think about the burden of, what that does, the impact on someone's life, what that does to their future, what that does in terms of how other people who have read this story are going to encounter that person. And Thad was just really frank with him about all of that. And then this is the choice he made, was like, let's tell it. Let's tell my story.
No, and once again, Thad eloquently conveyed this man's story and put a personal face to the details of a rap sheet, I think is how I'm paraphrasing from the article. And I think that's important, especially in our community. Even though this gentleman is incarcerated, he talks about being part of this community. And I think we see all kinds of individuals that struggle with poverty and abuse that leads to addiction, that leads to crimes. And then maybe they take this path of, while incarcerated to prove themselves and possibly have a chance to improve their life with or without their freedom. And I think that's a journey to tell. And I really appreciate Thad's thoughtfulness on the story and the way that it was composed.
Yeah, I think his inclusion of, interviewing the victim of his last, offense, the one that ended him up behind bars for 25 years, I think including an interview with that person, that woman, made a difference too, in that, we want as much as we can, like a 360 view of this. Thad talked to his parents, his family, his former girlfriend, and, as I said, the victim of his last crime, and, really wanted to get a sense of all the complications going into this choice.
I think that it's an amazing article, and I encourage everybody to pick up this week's North Coast Journal and read the entire story for themselves and go along on the journey and, see the humanity in it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jennifer. I am sure Thad will say you did an amazing job.
Just wait. It's going to get worse.
Well, we are going to shift gears. We have another very heartwarming story to report on before getting to some of the down and dirty.
Yeah, so this week, you may have read Jessica Ashley Silva's contributions to our paper in the past, largely about food, sometimes cooking with cannabis. And my personal favorite that I will never let her live down, her failed attempt at making cannabis-infused mozzarella balls. Never forget. However, this week, and it sort of dovetails with some of the issues we were talking about before about, kids being in the system, etc. This week she wrote about something that until we talked about it really recently, I didn't even know that she was involved in. But she is a CASA advocate volunteer. So you may have heard the ads. That's how she actually heard of CASA. She heard the ads on the radio. This is the court-appointed special advocate group, and they are a nonprofit, and they help kids who are going through the system, like in foster care. And they, for example, they'll have a therapist, they'll have, people appointed by the courts for different things. They have different people in their lives, but sometimes it is really helpful to have somebody who is just your friend and advocate, somebody on your side looking out for you and figuring out what all you need and what services you can get a hold of through the system, and also just going out and being a kid with. And Jessica, in this essay, which is great, it's called An Advocate's Journey, and it's under It's Personal column. She talks about kind of her nerves going into it, about how she's like, I don't have kids, I don't know how to deal with kids. But it turns out that kind of just being herself and letting those kids be themselves made a big difference for them, but also for her. And she talks about what she got out of the experience, including as a former foster kid, really a lot of positive healing from, her own past experiences with the system, and the feeling that, she was able to contribute and make a difference for somebody else in the way that would have really helped her. And I encourage anybody, I mean, everybody should read it, but especially if you've ever heard the ads for CASA and thought to yourself, I wonder, and then, it sounds too hard, it sounds like too big a commitment, read about it and see what you think. I think the more you know about the program and what it does for kids and the people who participate, I think the more you might want to be involved. So take a look at it, and she's great, and I was really pleased that she was willing to share this with us.
Yes, and I agree. Anybody that has ever heard those ads or thought about participating in such a program, I think they would be encouraged by what she has to share and possibly get involved themselves.
Yeah, like I said, I'm really grateful that she was willing to share it.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And next, we're going to turn to another very interesting piece by Mike Kelly.
Yes. Mike Kelly, like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. But this week's Washed Up column was teased on the front cover as Codpiece, not for no reason. He is writing, the piece is titled Hot Tom Cod Action, and it is about Tom Cod. And we are used to Mike Kelly giving us
something a bit cheeky.
Cheeky descriptions of marine life behavior, and sometimes, if you ever wanted to hear a graphic description of kelp reproducing, Mike Kelly's your guy. But this week he is talking about the tom cod, the Pacific tom cod, which is sometimes found on our beaches, washed up, as we say. And he is discussing it in an imaginary format. Don't be scared. This isn't a new thing that we're doing on Access. He is imagining a format of, he calls it the Washed Up Exucation Channel, which is a scientific information format that people will actually watch. Porn. It's porn. And so he's imagining sort of like a scenario where you have porn going and then somebody stepping in to talk about nature and tell you about how tom cods live and reproduce and everything else. and it's very goofy, as you can imagine. And there were some things in there that I was sort of surprised about, including that some of the fish that he finds washed up inside other fish who have swallowed it. This is like very like little old lady that swallowed the fly. The tom cod eats littler things and in turn is eaten by larger things in the water. He talks about its migration, where you can mostly find it, how much salinity it needs, and it can be difficult to discern from other fish, but he gives some really good descriptions about its fins and whatnot. And he says that the key to knowing it's a tom cod is that it should be, let's see, the mouth to fin length should be approximately 33% of the fish, which is the kind of like only people who are, you know, fish, insect, and bird nuts, I know, go crazy for. But if you are a person who walks the beach and sees stuff washed up, I know you want to know what it is. Hilariously, you may recall last week Barry Evans did a history of sexual AIDS in particular. It was the history of the dildo last week, and we got a lot of, I've seen it shared quite a bit online. So some of the, apparently, according to Barry's article, some of the stone and wood implements that have been labeled as household tools were different kinds of household tools. But because Barry had some physical averages listed in his article, Mike, upon reading Barry's article, had to come back to me and make some edits based on Barry's research. So it's nice to know that, you know, our columnists working in the sciences are working together.
Concert.
Yeah, they are working in concert. Good for them. My job is so weird.
Well, and I like that we're kind of like skidding that line of not safe for work articles now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what time this goes on the radio or on what time it airs exactly. So I'm trying to, you know, there's kids around.
We're calling them marital aids.
Yes, indeed. But we have actually some other cool stuff in the paper too going on. I do want to point everyone to the calendar this week. We are in that robust time period where there is a ton of stuff going on, and the calendar is just getting fatter and fatter. And the set list is also getting fatter and fatter. So as you're looking around for things to do in town and out of town, at least in county but out of town, there is a ton going on. Of course, Colin has a bunch of really good shows lined up, including he has a couple of things that are on the same night that you have to choose between, which I'm like, this is such a luxury, right? Because I'm still reeling from when we had like no live shows happening. But he's enjoying some new music and also some old favorites around town. So go and check it out. Over in the calendar, Kali Koziris, our calendar editrix, has found a number of things, including, that's right, those bird nerds that I was talking about before. It's Godwit Days time.
Excellent.
Yes. So your friend with the vest with all the pockets, if you haven't seen them, it's because of Godwit Days. That's where they are. There's a lot happening. It starts on April 18th. So get in there. There's a bunch of Earth Day stuff happening and also 420 Day stuff happening. There are concerts. There is an art installation happening at the zoo with compostable materials. It's busy. And then if you haven't already got your ticket, or your free ticket, it's probably too late. But Cal Poly Humboldt's Hip Hop Conference is including keynote speaker Chuck D. So
there's no excuse for not having something to do. And the calendar is always the best resource to find out what's going on. Well, thank you, Jennifer. We managed to fill the air, even though we, of course, are missing Thad, and we'll look forward to his return. The show is on at 5:30, just so everybody is aware of the airing time. And that wraps up our time for this week. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick up your copy today. Or, of course, you can find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum. Thanks for being with us and staying informed and supportive of our North Coast community. Have a great week, y'all.